On the roof of a factory in the south of Leeds, there was once a field, a full acre of real grass spread across the top of a building shaped like an ancient Egyptian temple and grazed by a small flock of sheep. They had not walked up there. Sheep cannot climb ladders. So the men who built this place invented one of the first hydraulic lifts in the world for the single purpose of carrying sheep to the sky. Below them, under 67 cones of glass daylight, lay what was said to be the single largest room on the planet, a mill spinning flax into linen, the grass overhead keeping the air moist so the thread would not dry out and snap. It sounds invented, it is completely true, and it tells you everything about the town that built it, because Leeds had no coast, no harbour, no river to the sea worth the name. By every rule of trade, it should have stayed small forever. Instead, it became one of the richest cities on earth, not once, twice. This is the story of the most improbable rise in Britain, a place that had no natural reason to exist and refused to accept it. But before the glass towers, before the suits, before the sheep on the roof, there was only a river and a bridge. Leeds sits inland, deep in the folds of West Yorkshire, on a modest river called the Aire. Liverpool had the Atlantic. Bristol had the estuary and the slave routes. London had the Thames and the whole world at the end of it. Leeds had a shallow, winding stream that ran the wrong way, toward the middle of the country rather than out to open water. If you wanted to move heavy goods in the 17th century, you moved them by water, because a single barge could carry what 100 pack horses could not. A landlocked town was a town with a ceiling over its ambitions, and yet the hills around Leeds held a different kind of wealth. Soft water for washing and dyeing, fast Pennine streams to turn a wheel, and everywhere on every slope sheep. West Yorkshire had been spinning and weaving wool since the Middle Ages, in cottages and on hand looms, families working fleece by candlelight. Leeds became the place where all of that cloth was brought to be sold. By the middle of the 16th century, a market for woolen cloth had grown up on Leeds Bridge, the old crossing over the Aire. Twice a week, before dawn, the clothiers of the surrounding villages carried their finished pieces into town and laid them out along the parapet in the street. By the late 1600s, it had outgrown the bridge entirely, and the trade moved up the hill onto Briggate. Then came the cloth halls, great covered exchanges. The first opened around 1711, where thousands of pieces changed hands in near silence under strict rules of trade. So understand this, long before any canal, long before any factory, Leeds was already the beating heart of the Yorkshire cloth trade. The town was not made by machines. It was already rich in merchants and middlemen, in men who bought cloth cheap in the villages and sold it dear to the world. But there was still that one enormous problem. The cloth had to reach the world, and the world was at the coast, and the coast was far away. So Leeds did something that even now feels almost mad in its ambition. It decided to build its own way to the sea. The first attempt reached eastward. For decades, the merchants had begged Parliament to let them tame the River Aire, to deepen it and lock it and turn a shallow stream into a working waterway. They were refused again and again. Then in 1699, an act finally passed, and by 1704 the Erie and Calder navigation was open. Engineers had straightened and locked the river all the way down to Leeds, giving the town, for the first time in its history, a reliable route by water. That route ran east, through the flatlands, out toward the port of Hull and the North Sea beyond. A town with no coast had reached the Eastern Ocean by rebuilding a river, and for most places that would have been enough. For Leeds it was only half the map, because the great markets of the age were opening to the west, the cotton and the coal and the booming port of Liverpool, and past Liverpool the Atlantic, and past the Atlantic the whole hungry, expanding empire. Reaching Hull was good. Reaching Liverpool would be extraordinary, but between Leeds and Liverpool stood the Pennines, the rocky spine of northern England. To join the two seas, you would have to cut a canal clean across the hills. In 1770, an act was passed to do exactly that, and work began on the Leeds and Liverpool Canal. Here is where the legend usually says that sheer northern grit dug a ditch to the sea and the money poured in. The truth is slower and harder, and honestly, more impressive. This was the longest canal ever built by a single company in Britain. 127 miles of water, 91 locks, Aqueducts flung over valleys, staircases of locks, climbing the hillsides at Bingley. It was estimated to cost about £250,000. It ended up costing more than £1 million, and it did not open in a season of triumph. It stalled, the money ran out, the American war drained the country of funds and confidence, and for years the two ends of the canal simply sat there, one reaching out of Yorkshire, one reaching out of Lancashire, unable to meet. It took 46 years to finish. 46 years. A man could be born, learn a trade, marry, raise children, grow old, and die still waiting for this canal to open. The men who cut its first sod never saw the water reach the far coast, and what they built was no mere ditch. At Bingley they raised a staircase of 5 great locks, one chamber opening into the next, lifting the boats up the hillside like water climbing stairs, a piece of engineering that still stops people in their tracks today. Once it was open, the barges came in their thousands, and the cargo that mattered most was not even cloth. It was coal, black and endless, floated west to feed the furnaces and the ships of Liverpool. When the final stretch was completed in 1816, Leeds was at last joined coast to coast, the Irish Sea on one side and the North Sea on the other, and the landlocked town sat in the middle of it all, like a spider, at the centre of a web it had spun by hand. Think about what that actually means. A place with no sea had built itself 2 coastlines out of nothing. It had manufactured its own geography. And now the water was open. The factories came. For most of its life, Leeds had been a town of merchants rather than makers. The cloth was still woven in cottages on hand looms by families who carried their finished pieces into the halls to be sold. What changed that, more than any single machine, was a man named Benjamin Gott. In 1792, Gott bought a field beside the area called Beening, just west of the town, and on it, he built something close to new under the sun, a single great works where the whole business of turning raw wool into finished cloth could be gathered under one roof and driven by one power. Beening was among the first true woolen factories anywhere in the world. Within a few years it employed well over 1,000 people, weaving blankets and uniform cloth for an army locked in a long war with France. Gott grew so rich on it that he served as mayor of Leeds and died a millionaire, in an age when that word still meant something close to a private king. His mill stood for the best part of 2 centuries. Then, in the 1960s, it was knocked flat, and a newspaper office was raised on the spot where it had stood. Hold on to that image, because it is the whole story in miniature. In Leeds, even the mightiest things are quietly cleared away to make room for whatever comes next. You have already met the strangest of them. On Marshall Street, in the district of Holbeck, a flax spinner named John Marshall built his temple. Marshall had made a fortune turning flax into linen, and he was obsessed with ancient Egypt. So when he raised his greatest mill between 1836 and 1840, he shaped it after the temple of Horus at Edfu, with lotus columns and an obelisk for a chimney. Temple works. That one vast room, lit from above, filled with machines and more than 2,000 workers, many of them women and children, breathing the hot damp air that the grass roof kept moist so the thread would run. It was a wonder of the age. People travelled for miles just to see the sheep on the roof. But flax was only the beginning. All across Leeds the mills multiplied, and the air thickened, and the population swelled as families poured in from the countryside chasing wages. For a time it looked as though Leeds might become a great wool town in its own right. And then something quietly decisive happened. The trade in fine worsted cloth began to drift a few miles away to Bradford, which would soon crown itself the wool capital of the world. Leeds could have fought for it. Instead, it did the thing it always seems to do at the very moment it should be finished. It changed what it was. If Bradford would make the cloth, Leeds would make the clothes. This is the part the usual telling skips straight over, and it is the true engine of everything that follows. In the 1850s, a Leeds manufacturer named John Barron looked at the new sewing machines coming out of America and had an idea that would reshape how the whole world dressed. Until then, clothes were either made at home or made to measure, one garment at a time, slowly, by hand, for whoever could afford a tailor. Barron adapted a cutting tool, a band knife of the kind used to cut wood veneer, so that it could slice through many layers of cloth at once. Suddenly, you could cut dozens of identical jacket fronts in a single stroke, hand them to rooms full of machinists, and produce good clothing, ready to wear, at a price ordinary people could pay. Ready-made clothing, as a mass industry, was more or less born here, and Leeds, with its cloth halls and its canals and its armies of skilled hands, was perfectly built to become its capital. Which brings us to a young immigrant, newly arrived and barely speaking English, who took a job with a Leeds clothing firm. His name was Michael Marks. Marks was a Jewish refugee from what is now Belarus, one of thousands who came to Leeds in those years, fleeing poverty and persecution in the east, crowding into a district called the Leylands, and finding work in the needle trades. He did not last long stitching for others. He borrowed £5 from a wholesaler named Isaac Dewhurst, and in 1884 he set up a stall in the covered market at Kirkgate. He had no fine goods and no gift for haggling, so he made a virtue of it. Everything on one part of the stall cost a single penny, and he hung a sign above it. Do not ask the price, it is a penny. It was honest, it was simple, and it worked. 10 years later, he needed a partner to handle the books, and Dewhurst's cashier, a man named Tom Spencer, put in his own money and his own name. Marks and Spencer, born on a market stall in Leeds, from a £5 loan by a man who arrived with nothing, and they were not alone. A few years into the new century, another immigrant arrived, a young Lithuanian Jew who had been born with the name Mesh David Osinski, and who would remake himself, as so many did, with an English name. He became Montague Burton. He opened his first little shop selling menswear elsewhere, but when he needed a factory, when he needed skilled tailors and machinists in their thousands, there was only ever one place to build it. He came to Leeds. From 1921, on Hudson Road, in the east of the city, Burton built something that almost defies belief. It grew and grew until it became, by the middle of the 1920s, the largest clothing factory in the world. More than 10,000 people worked on that single site. They turned out 30,000 suits a week. There was a canteen said to be the largest in the world, feeding the workforce in shifts. There were dentists and eye specialists on site, because close needlework ruined the eyes, and a pension scheme before the welfare state existed to provide one. Montague Burton called himself the tailor of taste, and his promise was radical in its plainness. A working man could walk in, be measured, and walk out days later in a properly cut suit for a price he could actually afford. Good clothes, he believed, gave an ordinary man his self-respect, and an ordinary man, for the first time in history, could have them. To walk into Hudson Road at full tilt was to walk into a small country. One tailor who worked there remembered it simply as a town in itself. There were rooms of sewing machines stretching further than the eye could easily follow, whole families working the same line, fathers cutting and daughters stitching and mothers pressing, and most of the workforce were women. There was a sports ground for the staff behind a high brick wall. Boys started at 14 as barrow boys and were slowly taught the trade until they became cutters and tailors themselves. And from this one site in the east of a landlocked northern city, a river of dark wool suits flowed out to every town in Britain, week after week, year after year, until the ordinary Englishman's idea of what a respectable man ought to wear was, quietly, a decision that had been made in Leeds. Here is the statistic that should stop you. Through the 1930s, 40s, 50s and into the 60s, the great tailoring firms of Leeds produced somewhere close to half of all the suits that British men bought. Half. When a man in Glasgow or Cardiff or London put on his wedding suit, his D-mob suit, his Sunday best, the odds were even that it had been cut and stitched in this one inland city. It is even said, though no one can quite prove it, that the phrase the full Monty, meaning the whole thing done properly, began as the name for a complete three-piece suit from Montague Burton, and Burton was only the grandest of the tailoring dynasties. When the Second World War ended and millions of servicemen came home out of uniform, it was the clothing firms of Leeds that were handed the vast task of dressing them, stitching the D-mob suits that a demobilised soldier was issued to walk back into civilian life. A jacket, trousers, a shirt, the whole outfit a man needed to begin again. Another Leeds tailor, Joseph Hepworth, had grown a chain that would outlive the suits entirely. Many years later, when almost nobody wanted a made-to-measure three-piece anymore, the Hepworth business quietly turned itself into a high-street clothing shop under a new name. You know it today as Next. Even the old tailors of Leeds, it turned out, had learned the city's one deep trick. When the thing you are known for begins to die, you do not die with it, you become something else. A landlocked town with no port had reached out along its handmade rivers and clothed a nation. And here is where I have to be honest with you about the shape of this story, because the word rise is only ever half of it. The strangest thing about Leeds is not that it rose, plenty of towns rose. The strangest thing is what happened when everything that built it began to die, because Leeds would go on to do the entire impossible thing a second time, from the ruins of the first. But to understand the second rise, you have to sit for a moment with the fall, and the fall, when it came, was not a single blow. It was a long, quiet leaving. It began earliest with flax. Even in the 1870s and 1880s, cheaper linen from Belfast and from abroad was undercutting the Leeds mills, and one by one they closed or switched to other work. John Marshall's great Egyptian temple, that wonder with the sheep on its roof, stopped spinning flax and was sold off before the century was out. The grass on the roof was left to the weather. The sheep were long gone. Then slowly came the turn against the very thing Leeds had perfected. Making clothes is work that needs many hands, and hands are cheaper in other parts of the world. Through the middle of the 20th century, and then faster and faster from the 1960s and 70s, cheap imported clothing flooded into Britain, and the vast Leeds factories that had dressed the empire could not compete on price with garments stitched thousands of miles away. The decline was not dramatic. There was no single terrible day. There was just a workforce that shrank and then shrank again. Rooms that had roared with 1,000 machines fell to a few dozen. The great tailoring names survived for a while by becoming shops instead of makers, selling clothes they no longer produced. And then, in 1981, manufacturing at Burton's Hudson Road stopped altogether. The largest clothing factory the world had ever seen, the pride of the city, the place that fed 10,000 families, went quiet. And the great names the city had given the world did not stay to keep it company. Marks Spencer had long since moved its heart southward and grown into a national institution run from London, its penny bazaar origins on a Leeds market stall reduced to a line in a company history. Burton's shops were folded into a larger group, passed from owner to owner across the decades, the founder's proud name surviving in the glass of 100 high streets, long after the last suit was cut on Hudson Road. Leeds had handed Britain some of the most familiar names it owns, and one by one they had grown up and left home, the way children do. Walk through Leeds in the 1980s and you would have seen the pattern that broke so many northern towns. The mills empty, the chimneys cold, the canals, those miracles of ambition that took 46 years to dig, now stagnant and forgotten, choked with weeds and old prams. The trade they carried, long since gone, to road and rail and then gone altogether. This is the moment where the documentary about almost any other industrial town becomes an elegy. The moment where the story is simply about loss, about a place that had its one great century and then faded, its best days sealed behind glass in a local museum. That is not what happened here. And why it did not happen is the real reason we are talking about Leeds at all, because a strange truth had been hiding underneath the mills the whole time. For 2 centuries, all that trade in cloth and clothing had needed something else to function. It needed banks to lend the money. It needed insurers to cover the ships and the warehouses. It needed accountants to keep the books and lawyers to write the contracts and settle the disputes. Every bolt of cloth that left a Leeds cloth hall sat on top of an invisible mountain of paperwork and finance. And when the physical industry drained away, that invisible mountain did not drain with it. The bankers stayed. So did the lawyers and the accountants and the clerks who understood exactly how a fortune moved from one ledger to the next. The city had spent 200 years quietly building a nervous system of money and expertise to serve its factories, and now, with the factories gone, that nervous system simply looked around for something new to do. So Leeds did the only thing Leeds has ever really known how to do. It reinvented itself completely. Over a single generation, a city defined by the smell of wool grease and machine oil turned itself into something almost the opposite. A city of glass and screens and quiet meeting rooms. Today Leeds is widely described as the largest centre for financial and legal services in Britain outside London, though it is fair to say that Edinburgh can lay claim to that crown by some measures too. More than 30 national and international banks now have a base in the city. Every one of the big 4 global accountancy firms works here. Dozens of the country's top law firms have major offices in Leeds, and the financial and professional sector employs tens of thousands of people, generating billions of pounds a year. The town that once measured its wealth in suits a week now measures it in deals and contracts and funds. And then came the confirmation that no marketing brochure could have bought. The Bank of England, the ancient central bank of the entire country, chose Leeds. The bank has had a presence in the city for a very long time, going right back to a branch it opened in 1827, in the days when the cloth halls were still full. But in recent years it has committed to something far larger, deciding to build its most significant base outside London right here, aiming for at least 500 staff in the city by 2027, roughly 1 in every 10 people the bank employs. The nation's financial guardian, planting a northern flag in the old capital of cloth. Alongside it have come the financial regulator and other national institutions, until people in the city began, only half joking, to call the district around Wellington Street the Northern Square Mile. At the western edge of the centre, on old rail land and cleared warehouse plots, a whole new financial quarter rose out of nothing. A cluster of offices called Wellington Place, where some of the biggest names in banking and law and government now work behind identical sheets of glass. Tens of thousands of people flow into the city each morning to sit at those desks, many of them trained at the 4 universities that have made Leeds one of the largest student cities in the country. The old mills had needed strong backs and quick hands. The new city runs on degrees and spreadsheets, and the quiet certainty of people who move other people's money. You can see the change most plainly if you simply look up. For most of its history, the tallest things in the Leeds sky were mill chimneys and church spires. Now the skyline bristles with towers of glass. There is Bridgewater Place, finished in 2007, the first building in the city to break 100 metres, so blunt and looming that locals nicknamed it the Dalek. And it has already been overtaken, first by Altus House and then by others climbing higher still. Now I want to be honest here rather than sell you a myth, because that is the whole point of a story like this. Many of the very tallest towers are not gleaming bank headquarters at all. They are student accommodation, home to the tens of thousands of young people drawn by the city's universities. The real money tends to gather lower down, in the broad, dense, expensive office blocks around Wellington Place, where the lawyers and bankers work. But the meaning of the skyline holds all the same. A landlocked town that once put sheep on a rooftop to make linen now puts thousands of workers behind glass to move money that exists only as numbers on a screen. Which leaves the last question, the one every one of these stories has to answer in the end. What is actually left of the old Leeds today if you go and walk the ground? The answer is that it is all still there, if you know how to look, hiding in plain sight beneath the new city. The canals that took 46 years and more than £1 million to build no longer carry a single bale of cloth, but they have been dredged and cleaned and lined with bars and flats. And on a summer evening they are crowded with people who have no idea what those still waters once meant. The great mills, the ones that survived the wrecking ball, have been hollowed out and reborn as apartments and offices and galleries, their iron pillars left exposed on purpose so that someone drinking a coffee can run a hand over the machinery of a vanished world. And in the covered market at Kirkgate, if you go and stand in the right spot, you are standing where Michael Marks laid out his penny goods in 1884 at the birthplace of one of the most famous shops on earth, a business that grew so large it long ago left the city that made it. And then there is the Temple. Temple Works still stands in Holbeck, that astonishing Egyptian mill with the field on its roof. But it has spent years as a ruin, propped up and fenced off, its great columns weathering, its largest room in the world silent and empty. The sheep are a memory of a memory now. For a long time it looked as though it might simply crumble away, one more magnificent Leeds thing that the city outlived. And then, only recently, the government pledged £10 million towards saving it, the first step in a plan to turn Marshall's Temple into a northern home for the British Library, a building that spun thread for the empire becoming a building that will hold the nation's books. The full cost will run to many times that, and nothing is certain. But the intention tells you something. Even the ruins of Leeds refuse to be only ruins. They keep being asked to become something else, so think again about that flock of sheep grazing on an acre of grass on the roof of an Egyptian temple, hauled into the sky by a lift invented for no other reason. It is easy to laugh at, and easy to love, and easy to file away as a piece of Victorian eccentricity. But it is really the whole city in a single image. Here was a place that had every reason to stay small and stay quiet. No sea, no port, a shallow river running the wrong way. And instead of accepting the ceiling that geography had built over it, this town spent 300 years doing the impossible thing over and over whenever the world told it that its time was done. It built rivers to two oceans. It dressed a nation from an inland valley. And when the industry that made all of it finally died, it did not lie down and become a museum. It stood up, brushed off the dust, and got rich all over again on something you cannot see or touch at all. A field of grass, high in the smoke, with sheep looking out over the roofs of a city that was never supposed to matter. And below them, then as now, the machinery kept turning, making something out of nothing, the way it always has. If a story like this is the kind of thing you love, then you are in luck, because YouTube reckons you are going to like the video now showing on your screen, so go ahead and click it, and if you made it all the way to the end of this one, do subscribe, and I will see you in the next.